So if you live, work, or play around the Rittenhouse area, you may have noticed this week, which for those of you listening in the future is the third week of August 2018, that the ugly car dealership advertisements on the city trash cans have been replaced by hand-selected paintings, photographs, and other art by local Philly artists. This initiative is called Trash Can Takeover and was created and curated by this week's guest, Brendan Lowry. Now, we don't talk about Trash Can Takeover in this episode because it was recorded before it went public, but check out the show notes for a link to follow Trash Can Takeover on Instagram and learn more about the artists, their work, and how Brendan's partnered with Conrad Benner and City Fitness to make it all happen. But first,
I shared the photo and there was a comment from somebody and he mentioned how I was just perpetuating stereotypes and I, got defensive, but in reality, he was absolutely right. And I realized that, I started to have this responsibility, right? If this account has thousands of followers and I'm supposed to be telling Philadelphia's story through people, it can't just be through my lens or my context.
You're listening to Philly Who, the podcast that tells the stories of the doers, thinkers, and performers of Philadelphia. My name is Kevin Schmidlin, and in this episode, I'm talking with Brendan Lowry, the founder of Lowry Creative. Brendan is one of the biggest social media influencers in Philadelphia and is best known for the Instagram account he runs, Peopledelphia, which has over 85,000 followers. He's also a part of the founding team of Curelate, one of Philly's fastest growing startups. In this episode, we'll chat about how Curelate started as an Airbnb for parking and storage, but after that idea failed, Brendan and the Curelate team found a much more successful idea.
Wow, we need this. We want this. How much does it cost? Can you come to New York to meet with our VP team? Whereas, 6 months ago, I'm on Craigslist begging people to list their driveway.
We'll also talk about how Peopledelphia began and how, as it grew, Brendan had to find ways to ensure it actually represented all Philadelphians.
And so I think the initial thought was, I need to explore more neighborhoods. But then I started realizing even if I did that, there's still all this context and bias that I'm not even aware of.
And he'll share how through building a Philly startup, sharing Philly stories, and working with Philly artists, Brendan has fallen in love with the city and its people.
Yeah, it terrifies me to think about what my life would have been like if I would have taken that job in New York.
All this and more about Brendan Lowry, Curelate, Lowry Creative, the life of an influencer, and Peopledelphia right now on Philly Who. Stay tuned. So these days, being a professional social media marketer is a common and thriving career path. And in fact, many universities offer bachelor's and master's degrees in social media marketing and management. But in 2007, when Brendan Lowry enrolled in Temple University, go Owls, that really wasn't a thing. And frankly, he himself didn't even consider it a career path. So he picked a major. Then he changed it. Then he changed it.
So I initially went for film.
Then he changed it.
I then switched to marketing and then advertising and then entrepreneurship. I ultimately ended with public relations.
Wow.
But there was a stint between freshman and sophomore year where, sort of like I do with a lot of things, I quickly, for some reason, determined that I wanted to be an astronaut. So using the Temple online portal, I rushed to drop all of the classes that I had planned for the next semester. And as I went to, add all the beginner classes for the engineering major or math major, whatever it was at the time, I was blocked and it said, you need this level of math to be able to actually add this class to your schedule. So I called my guidance counselor and he's like, yeah, what the hell are you doing?
This was after you had dropped your classes?
Yes, this is after, right?
Oh,
so
no.
That's typically, I think I've been better about that, but sometimes I'm quick to just rush to do that. And he quickly reminded me that in order to actually get into Temple, my freshman year, I needed to take a very rudimentary math class that didn't even get me college credit.
Oh my gosh.
Just to be able to attend the school. So luckily he was able to add those classes back that I dropped, and I'm not on the path to be an astronaut. I still have hope that maybe one day they'll need someone to document a journey and I'll be invited, but for now those plans have been shelved.
That's funny. Earthadelphia.
Yeah.
So you wound up with, you said, public relations.
Correct.
What was the plan at that point? So when you picked that major, did you know that was going to be the one?
No, I think it got to a point where I really didn't know what I wanted to do. At the time, I thought entrepreneurship was, strictly starting a lawn mowing company or opening a restaurant, or opening some type of, mom and pop store. So, the stuff that I've done, that I'm doing now, or the stuff that I've done over the past few years, at the time, that wasn't really on my radar. I was doing a lot of things on social media and the internet with marketing, but they were all for fun or for projects. And I quickly learned, that that's a skill, and that I can apply, all this knowledge of social media and digital marketing to a career. But at the time, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. In public relations, there was some storytelling involved. Frankly, it seemed pretty easy, and I was just sort of eager to get my degree and really focus in on something to hopefully land a job after graduation.
Yeah. So at that point, now what year did you graduate? Was it
2011?
Okay, so you graduated in 11. At that point, were people even getting jobs in social media yet? Because, I mean, that's a fairly new thing, and I think it kind of all cropped up at once that people were actually hiring social media specialists. Was that on the table at the time that you graduated?
It was just starting to get on the table. A lot of the opportunities were really junior, or social media was a part of a larger role, especially in public relations. So, social media became sort of just a distribution point. So, you had a press release or some type of story that was going out, you would pitch reporters, you would post to your blog or to your website, and then they would just blast whatever was left into social media. So I think I did see somewhat of an opportunity there. One of my internships, I was working with a PR firm, and I sort of saw that they weren't using social media well. And it was one of those first experiences where I was like, wow, I know more than these people about this thing. I can really help them. And so, while I didn't exactly know what I was going to do, there was sort of the early signs that there was something here with social media and storytelling, beyond just, writing a press release.
So what was your first move after graduating?
So after graduation, I took a full-time job with a really boring healthcare, health benefits administration company in King of Prussia. I sort of sold them on this vision of me being a digital marketing and social media expert, because at the time I thought I was, because I knew more than people that were working at the company. But that didn't turn out too well, because they moved really, really slowly. I wanted to do all these cool and innovative things. And so I started to search for other opportunities while I was there. And I stumbled upon a company called Skillshare, which was a startup that had launched in New York City, and they were starting to open up sort of different regions across the country. And the idea for Skillshare was, it was an online marketplace for offline classes. So anyone could list a class and something that they're an expert in, and then they would then teach it in person, at a coffee shop or a library. So I landed it was technically full-time. So I had this full-time gig at the healthcare company. While I was sitting in my cubicle, what I was really doing was working on Skillshare. So I was kind of digitally hustling, finding teachers to teach these classes, which, at the time I didn't realize was going to be an amazing way for me to build my network, because basically I would reach out to people who I thought had an expertise in everything from sewing or arts and crafts to, building a slide deck for an investor, presentation.
So that was the first point when you started seeing the value of reaching out to just all kinds of different people in an area?
Yeah. I think that's when it really started to click that, I've been using the internet, even in middle school and high school, using MySpace and helping bands, build their MySpace pages and things like that. It was all for fun, but I started to realize that same skill of building community online could impact my career. So
shortly after that, you joined a local startup for yourself, correct?
Yes, called Storably.
Storably.
So it was interesting. So the Skillshare stint went really, really well. And so we had a big launch party to sort of open unlock Philadelphia as a city that had classes. And one of the teachers that I had brought on to teach a class on how to raise money and how to create a pitch deck was Brett Topshee from, I think the company is now called Red and Blue Ventures. And he's an investor. And at the Skillshare launch event, he actually introduced me to Apu Gupta, who had just started a company called Storably here in Philadelphia. And so at that time, I actually had a full-time offer from Skillshare to join them in New York, to kind of build out the same model that I used to launch Philly. But then I also had this opportunity from Storably to join them full-time.
Interesting. So you had to make the choice whether to stay in Philly and join an unproven startup or to go to New York and join this startup that's a little bit farther ahead of the game.
Yeah, and way sexier. You know, they had money from, can't remember his exact name, but from a couple of big time New York VCs, and they were a consumer product that had thousands of users, and it was way sexier at the time. And, I'd love to say that, I chose Storably because I wanted to stay in Philly and I believed in the vision. But frankly, it was, the decision really came down to just signed a lease after college for being in Philadelphia. New York was way more expensive. Thankfully that was the case because, what we've done now from Storably to Curalate, which we may get into, has been a way bigger success and has been a way better experience for me. But I ended up choosing Storably.
Did you feel like you were compromising at that point in time? Like, did you think you were missing out by not joining Skillshare?
Yes.
Really?
And especially, 2 or 3 months into the Storably experience. But I think that all goes with, just being young and naive and maybe not seeing the bigger picture and the bigger opportunity.
So what at that point was Storably?
So at that point, Storably was, I guess the easiest way to describe it, just Airbnb for parking and storage. So the idea was that if you had empty attic space or garage space or basement space, you could list that on Storably.com and then rent that out to people in your community. And the peer-to-peer market was really taking off at that time. Airbnb had just closed a massive round that valued them at $1 billion, which now seems small to what their valuation is. And so there was just sort of this excitement around people, selling or renting the stuff that they own and sort of that peer-to-peer collaboration.
So you guys got to work with some funding, but it wasn't too long until the decision was made to pivot, right?
Right. So I think we were about 4 months into Storably when everyone sort of realized that this vision of the initial vision just wasn't turning out.
Yeah. So was that like just a sort of growing feeling, or was there an aha moment where you guys were just like, okay, this is not working out?
I think it was probably a culmination of both. I think the data, with someone like Apu, leading the company and just really having a sense for if something's working and just that, I don't know, that innate ability to, just have that foresight. We just saw that we were getting a lot of press, right? Because the idea was cool. You would talk about this, and the initial reaction from everybody was, "Oh, that's interesting. That's cool," but no one was converting. And so we really started to determine that while people thought this was a cool idea, there were a couple of issues. One of the issues was that the demographic that is open to this concept is a younger demographic, and they don't have a ton of extra stuff, right?
To share.
And on the opposite, not only do they don't need it, they also they don't have the space to host other people's stuff. So I think that, there are concepts now that are building off of that are doing pretty well. I think that we were just a little bit too early, but luckily Apu had just the foresight and the data and just the vision that, this isn't working. We have a really solid team here. Let's possibly try something else.
Yeah. So you have investors. You guys decide it's time to try something else. What do you tell your investors at that point that you're essentially abandoning the business that they've invested in? What's the move?
Yeah, so it was pretty terrifying. I wasn't in the room. Looking back, I would have loved to have been, but at the moment I was like, this is great. I don't want to be here to tell Josh Koppelman that we've wasted this money and we don't know what to do. But looking back, Apu had the right approach. He was very straightforward and honest and open and said, look, here's what's happened the past few months. This bet that we made and this vision that we had, it's not working. Here's why it's not working. We have some money left. We can give that back to you guys.
Do you want it back?
Yeah. Or we can, we have a really great team. We have some other ideas. Let's see where this can go. And to our surprise, Josh was pretty happy. He said, most entrepreneurs come in here and they put a dead body on the table and they're trying to find a pulse.
Right.
You guys called a dead body. And instead of wasting a year of our time and all of our money. You guys did an amazing job at showing and proving that this isn't going to work. That's a win.
Yeah.
So what's next? Like, yeah, take the money that you have left and try to prove out something else and see if there's an opportunity to raise more money and keep going.
So what was next? Did you already have an idea?
We had a few different ideas, and personally for me, it was interesting because, looking back, I always think that I've had this interesting mix of naivety and solid instinct. And at the time there was another co-founder who in that transition had decided to leave Storably. And, he took me aside and said, "Hey, Brendan, I'm leaving Storably. I'm going to work at, some large consultancy, one of the big 4 firms." And he sort of encouraged me to leave as well. I'm not saying you should get out of here, but saying you don't have to stay. It may be in your best interest to start to find something else. Things aren't going as planned. It's okay to leave. And for me, I was surprised, and I was like, "What? Are you kidding me?" Like Apu and Nick, who's the other co-founder and the CTO at the time, these are the 2 smartest guys that I've ever worked with. We'll figure something out. So if you look at the data, I probably should have left. Right? Like when a company is starting to fail, there are many companies that can take that little bit of money that's left and turn it around. And again, every consultant or all the data points probably pointed to me leaving and finding something else. But there was something about working with Apu and Nick and just being excited about the chaos of all of this that I stayed, and we ended up taking a month to sort of brainstorm and come up with a bunch of different ideas. And Curelate was really the one that rose to the top.
So how many ideas did you say you guys came up with? What'd you say?
There was a list of 70 that we had in a Google spreadsheet.
So you had 70 ideas for different businesses.
Yeah. And,
wow.
Yeah. And it's been fun to sort of, we still email back and forth because we'll be on TechCrunch or we'll see a new startup launch and we're like, "Oh, that's idea number 44. And we'll point to the list. And of course ideas are just ideas, but it's fun. And it's clear that it was a special group that we had from all of our different backgrounds. And it was, it sounds fun. It was really stressful because we're sitting there in an office just spouting out ideas and realizing wait a second, we need to actually build a process around this, or we're not really going to get anywhere.
So what was it about the idea that became Curelate that rose to the top?
I think it was the initial feedback and traction that we were getting from prospects that we were previewing the idea with.
Oh, so you went out and tested this idea before deciding?
Yeah, so Nick, who's the CTO, just smartest human I've ever met, and I think that I'll ever meet. Top of his class in Harvard in computer science, just really, really bright. So Apu was browsing Pinterest, totally unrelated to the concept yet of what we have, and noticed that it was really difficult to actually buy something that he saw because there wasn't a connection from the product that he's seeing on Pinterest to the actual page on the brand's e-commerce site. And so this is probably happening pretty frequently. So Nick built an algorithm, in a few days that basically enabled me to put a URL into this site, and it would then crawl Pinterest and find whenever images from that website were being shared to Pinterest, regardless if the brand's name was mentioned. So it would spit out a report that would say, from michaelkors.com, here are all the top products that are being shared from Michael Kors' website. Here's how many times they've been shared. Here are the comments. And so I was then able to kind of build a PDF, and that would go on Twitter or LinkedIn and send this PDF to the marketing team from these big brands and say, "Hey, did you know that the past week this watch from michaelkors.com was the most popular product and it was shared X amount of times?" And the reaction was, "Holy shit, how did you find that out?"
They must have gobbled it up.
Yeah, can you come in next week, right? So we immediately had this reaction of, "Wow, we need this. We want this. How much does it cost? Can you come to New York to meet with our VP team?" Whereas with, 6 months ago, I'm on Craigslist begging people to list their space, their driveway, knocking on doors, right? So I think when we had that feeling of, wow, people want this, and just Pinterest was growing at a rapid rate, we just realized that, okay, there's something here.
You must have been so excited that this was blowing up like this.
It was a really cool feeling, right? Again, to go from 3 of us sitting in a room, feeling pretty terrible about the fact that we're all going to have to go work corporate jobs, and we know we're all smart and we're capable, but not having that idea, to then having, again, very senior people at very large brands saying we want this product. Apu and I had, some days we were 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. just back to back calls talking about the concepts, and emailing Nick, hey Nick, this works, right? These numbers that you send us, this is real, because we now have a meeting with this VP or this CMO. So it was a very exciting time.
At any point before Curelate took off, did you consider sticking with the safer route and maybe going back to one of those bigger companies like the one that you started with? Or were you just natural in the sort of high risk, high reward startup world?
Yeah, I was addicted. After experiencing, the healthcare tech company and what that was like, and having that sort of juxtaposition of now working in this high risk, high pace or fast paced environment, there was never a doubt in my mind that this is the direction that I was going to head in.
So Curelate would grow notoriously fast. They got a ton of funding in just a few years, had multiple offices, I guess hundreds of employees. When this growth is, exploding like this, what's going through your mind?
Yeah, it was sort of chaos. It was one of those things where we were growing so quickly that it was rare that you stopped for a second to actually realize what was happening. So we would have a quarterly all hands meeting where Apu would go through all the financials, and our goals and objectives, what we achieved the past quarter. They would basically present the same deck that they were going to present the investors. And I think that every quarter you would have that moment where it was like, whoa, we just added 30 employees this quarter. We just increased our revenue by X percent. So you would have those moments, but it wasn't, it wasn't one of those things where I was like realizing, I don't know.
You weren't stopping to smell the roses per se.
Yeah, it was just sort of happening, and it was fun, and it was chaotic, and it was all really exciting. But yeah. Yeah.
I hear that a lot in guests, when stuff's exploding like that, you're just on to the next thing all the time. For better or for worse, I guess. Would you say that at this point in time, before we go on to your current ventures, do you take any time to stop and smell the roses a little bit more than back then? Or are you still kind of go, go, go?
I'm still go, go, go. I think it's just part of my personality. And I wish I was able to take a step back a little bit more, but I think I get more excited about what's next as opposed to what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, gotcha.
Sometimes to a fault. But it's just sort of innate for me.
So tell me about the moment while the chaos that is Curelate's growth is going on, that you had the idea to start Peopledelphia.
Yeah, so Peopledelphia initially started as, for very selfish reasons. I wanted, at the time, it was about 2 years into Curelate, and I wanted to sort of meet people outside of just the tech world. And I felt that I wasn't connecting with enough creatives and people from other industries. And so I thought that Peopledelphia would be a great way to ask anyone for coffee. So instead of just emailing someone and saying, hey, can I pick your brain, or I'd love to meet you for coffee, I'm able to offer them something by providing them, a cool picture or some type of Q&A profile. So that was the initial concept behind Peopledelphia. And then additionally, from the entrepreneurial mindset, I saw Humans of New York, and how in just a few years that went from an Instagram account to New York Times bestselling.
Yeah, a business, right?
And a business and an entire platform. And so it struck me as a big opportunity. Not that I think that Peopledelphia will ever come close to what Humans of New York is. And frankly, it's now very different. But there was just something there, and I was surprised that no one had tried to yet replicate that concept of focusing on people in a very specific demographic and in a very niche way of telling people's stories.
Yeah. So you had that utility behind it, right? You wanted to meet other people. You saw what Humans of New York could do. Today, Peopledelphia has over 80,000 followers on Instagram. Did you think that could ever happen? Is that what you were driving for? Or is it another one of those things that just kind of, oh my gosh, I'm onto something here, and it blew up?
Yeah, there was, at the time, I didn't know how big it would become. And I think with Instagram was still fairly new in sort of using Instagram as the only platform or the only medium for a blog or for, what Peopledelphia still doesn't have a website. It was just strictly that Instagram account. So I don't know. It's hard to say if this was the expectation, and there's still a lot that I want to do with it, but it's fun to see it grow, and it's really interesting and exciting that I now have this big platform to share ideas and stories with.
Was there a moment that you recognized that it was growing to be more than something that just gets you coffee dates?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, the concept was sort of using it to get coffee dates. I would take a portrait of somebody and then share a quote from them. But I quickly learned that was really difficult. So in my mind, this Humans of New York thing, which was so easy, you just stop a stranger and ask them to tell you about their life. There's clearly a process and a talent that Brandon, I think it's Stanton, has from Humans of New York, that I don't. So it's very difficult to do just that. So I started to shift from this idea of portraits and stories to really just candid moments, because that's one thing that I really love, is candid kind of street photography. So I started sharing moments from my travels and my experiences in Philadelphia. And it was growing, and it was getting some decent engagement. And then, there was one day where I posted a photo of a street musician. It was a black man playing a trumpet. And I shared the photo, and there was a comment from somebody, which is one of the first negative comments that I ever received. And I was probably at a few thousand followers at this point. And he mentioned how, I was just perpetuating stereotypes, right? I wasn't showing other black people in, a tech job or in a suit, or exploring other alternatives outside of just street music. And of course, my initial, white privileged reaction was, what are you talking about? Like, I share all types of races, and I, got defensive because I felt like I was being attacked. But in reality, he was absolutely right. The stories that I was telling and the paths that I was going down was all through my lens of, where I work, the friends that I have, the places that I live. And I realized that, I started to have this responsibility, right? If this account has thousands of followers and I'm supposed to be telling Philadelphia's story through people, it can't just be through my lens or my context. And that was an exciting moment because, it sort of changed my view on the account and sort of how I'm telling other people's stories. But additionally, it really started to drive an extreme amount of growth for the account. So instead of, the account just being limited to my content, which, was dependent upon how many good photos I could take that week, I was able to regram and reshare other people's photos. So I was able to share more photos at a higher volume, which drove more engagement. And then additionally, whenever I would share someone else's photo, they would then tell all of their friends, and that would drive new followers. So it was a really interesting moment because, one, it changed a lot about my perception of the account and just how I view kind of this platform that I have. But then additionally, it started to drive a ton of growth.
Yeah. So I want to go back to that moment when, you had that sort of defensive reaction. How then, after you sort of got over that first moment, and you let the wall come down, and then you looked through and agreed with the comment, did you immediately think, well, I got to get other people to post, or how did you approach that?
I started to think through, how I can
get other lenses,
get other lenses. And so I think the initial thought was, I need to explore more neighborhoods, and I need to step out of my comfort zone a little bit more. But then I started realizing, even if I did that, there's still all this context and bias that I'm not even aware of, as a 20, whatever that was at the time, 22-year-old white male, right? And so, I'm really excited about the fact that I realized it at that time, because that allowed me to, again, open up the platform to share other people's content, and it really helped the account grow. And now I'm very intentional about the type of content that I'm curating on the feed and the stories that I'm telling. And I certainly have a long way to go in understanding that, but the fact that I'm aware, I think, is the most important first step.
Well, that's ringing a lot of bells for me, because we're talking on a podcast that's supposed to tell Philadelphia stories. So, that's a ton of really, really valuable perspective that I'm definitely going to take back and probably ask you a lot about when we stop recording. So that's really great. So, you start posting other people's content, it starts becoming this thing that's no longer your lens. It's no longer your thing, really. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. And it's funny because some people still don't even realize that they're not all my photos, which is interesting because I give photo credit to the person. I tag the photo with that username. But I would say that now most of the content that's featured isn't my content.
Well, you still, though, are extremely active and have a ton of followers. So you have your own personal Instagram account. Even your dog, I think, has 10,000 followers, right?
She
Can
does.
we ask you about that?
She's more popular than most people. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm happy that I have 500. And how did your dog, didn't she just like turn a year old or something?
She's a year, yeah. So she's grown her account to 10,000 followers within just a year. I think, and even with part of the reason that Peopledelphia was able to grow so fast, yes, there was the viral loop of sharing other people's content, but I'm just a nerd when it comes to growing these communities. So when it comes to understanding different growth hacks and ways to get as much eyeballs on the content and ways to grow, the followers authentically, having Curate at my disposal, I still, hopefully Apu isn't listening to this, but I still have my Curate login. I'm not paying for it, but I'm still able to use those tools that I've helped create in a way too at Curate. To help me grow these accounts. So part of it is just my ability and the strategy that I have in place to grow these accounts. And the other thing is just I'm a really good storyteller on social, so that helps.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm gonna have to ask your pup for some pointers as I look to grow the Philly Who influence. So throughout this time, as Peopledelphia is growing, I got to imagine you're spending a decent amount of time on it, right?
No.
No. No. Okay. So how?
Yeah. So, I mean, I say that jokingly. I would say the day to day, there actually isn't that much time. I want to dedicate more time to it. And I keep telling myself I want to look for, an intern potentially to act as an editor. But, right now on a day to day basis, I have no content calendar. I have no plan or strategy. If I'm bored, I look through the Peopledelphia hashtag. I save a photo that I think is good and is a good representation of what the feed should be. And I regram and I repost it. Now, outside of that, I'm working on, larger brand campaigns, and I'm working with a few nonprofits to help tell their stories. So those things take more strategy, but.
Well, backing it up though, in growing this account, you're still working for Curate at this time, right? So would you say that at that time it took a lot of time? Like, was it another one of those scenarios where you're at your desk and you kind of are off to the side building something else, just like it was the case with your first venture?
Yeah, and I think that is true. So I was spending a decent amount of time on it while at Curate, but it was always a project that was informing and helping what we were doing at Curate as well. So using Curate's tools, being able to understand how Instagram works, being able to understand from a brand's perspective what metrics I'm looking for in order to actually measure the success of the account and the success of the content. So anything that I was doing for Peopledelphia was also then lending toward, product development at Curate or, strategy at Curate as well. So they were somewhat connected.
So you left Curate a year ago. Curate had continued to grow, received more funding. It's still, as I understand, growing today. Why did you leave?
I didn't want to be a software marketing executive. So it got to a point where, as the company was growing and we were starting to really scale out the marketing team, I had a very serious conversation with Apu about what do I actually want to do. And, it was clear that I didn't want to be a software marketing executive. I didn't want to always work in the tech space and work on software. I just had other desires and other things that were interesting to me. And so at some point we had made that decision that, okay, well, that's not the path that you're going to take. And so I think for about a year and a half, I was helping with other projects, sort of acting as brand evangelist, where I was going and talking about the importance of social media, the importance of great content. Sometimes being the first person to have a meeting with a prospect, right? Because I'm talking high level, not trying to sell them on anything, just talking to them about the importance of social media and why great content is important. And then, of course, the sales team can then come in and talk about why Curelate needs to be the platform to sort of track and power all of that.
Yeah. So then at what point did you decide it's time for me to go out on my own?
Yeah, I think I left one of those meetings and I realized that I liked that conversation around social media strategy and brand marketing more than, the tech side of things. And I was starting to do some consulting on, content creation and social media strategy, influencer marketing outside of Curelate. And so I started to realize that that's really the path that I wanted to go down.
And then you must have been terrified to have that conversation with the two guys that you built this with, right?
Yeah, it was really hard. And I probably delayed that conversation for 3 or 4 months. I knew that I wanted to make the jump, but I wasn't ready yet to have that conversation. And it's interesting. One morning I woke up and I just didn't want to go into the office. I had no desire, which was, very different than a year prior, to where sometimes I'm not sleeping at night because I was legitimately that excited about what we were working on. And so when I had that feeling, I just sort of knew that was it. I had to go. So that day,
you had it that day.
I had it that day. So it wasn't this thing where I planned this presentation or I, had this beautiful exit strategy in mind. I told Apu I needed to meet with him, and we had that conversation, and I let him know that exactly what I'm saying now is that I just didn't want to come into the office today, and I didn't have that desire.
And how did he respond to that?
The response was overwhelmingly positive. He had told me that he was actually really excited for me, and he was surprised that this conversation didn't happen sooner. I think for him, he wants to see people leave Curelate and go on and start their own ventures. And, for me, he was really, he's my biggest mentor and someone that I worked with from the beginning of my professional career. And so I think he's excited to see where I'm able to take what's next. And is excited to see me grow. So the conversation went really, really well. We worked on, a short timeline of how we, announce it to the company, how I would transition out of things. And yeah, it went really well.
So you were surprised that it went so well?
I was surprised. Yeah. Apu's, he's a tough guy. And, at the time I thought that I would be letting him down, but in reality, I had hit the sort of the ceiling within the company of where I was going to add my value. That my skill set and the things that I was really good at and the things I wanted to focus on just weren't as valuable as they were at the beginning.
That warms my heart. I actually went through a similar situation myself recently. After spending 4 years at the company my first job out of college as a software developer, for a while I had decided that it was time for me to move on to do other ventures between the podcast, between Leave It, the company that I'm about to launch. And, I just every day knew that the conversation needed to happen and just wanted anything but to have that conversation. And then I spoke to the leader of my group at Cigna, and his name is Cam, and he was in town. He lives in Portland. And I told him the story. I went through the pitch. I'm sure you rehearsed it in your head a million times. I did the same thing. Went through the pitch, said, this is what I want to do. And then you just kind of brace for a minute and you're like, oh no. And, Cam kind of I saw him kind of look down, disappointed for a minute. And then it was just a split second. And then he immediately looked me in the eyes and said, that's awesome. I'm so proud of you for doing this. I'm so excited. How can we help you? And it was just the weight of the world off my shoulders. So totally relate with that. I imagine that's how you felt as well.
Yeah, and it made me even happier about the experience. And you probably felt the same way, because corporations and these companies often talk about how they value you as an employee and they want to see you grow and they're excited about your professional development. And most of the time, I think it's a bunch of BS. But for Cam to sort of have that sentiment with you, it really meant that, wow, they were honest, and that experience that you had was authentic.
Yeah. And even from a perspective of, we had just built a team here in Philadelphia. He extended his team from Portland, put it here in Philadelphia after I had been working with him for a long time, almost built a team around me. And, I'm thinking, like, we built this together. We've been, we spent the last year, getting this going, and for me to just leave, I felt awful. But like you said, the support was there. It's awesome.
and you left that day and you felt like $1,000,000.
Oh, and I still do, man, and still very, very thankful for that experience. Just so glad that went so well, and it just is a testament to how real the relationship was. It really was that positive. It wasn't BS, which is I think you and I are both fortunate about. Today, you said you do a lot of work with brand building, content curation, and you decided to start your own firm. Is that right?
Yeah. So I started the LLC called Lowry, and we frame the agency as a creative agency.
So now your full focused time gig is that conversation that you mentioned that you were having, where you walk into a room and just say, how can we make your social presence better than you ever imagined? You get to do that every day.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, social media is such an easy way into the brand and easy way to start the conversation, because most brands are doing an awful job at it. And it's so clear to me why. And I have I have processes that I've built and strategies that I've built that can apply to a lot of brands and a lot of different industries for social media. And it's a very easy way to get in the door. And then what's exciting is how that conversation then expands from, just Instagram strategy to, how can we actually approach that same problem we're facing on social? How do we solve that same problem for email marketing or for, our next outdoor event experience? So the thinking that the strategy and the thinking that we do within the company for social media, we can apply that to a lot of different marketing channels. And that's what's been really exciting to see it go beyond just social.
So how is your relationship with Philadelphia today different than what it was when you were making that decision of whether or not to stay in Philadelphia or to move to New York, now that you've, sort of built a whole social presence around the city?
I almost get scared sometimes thinking about that moment when I had to make that decision versus Skillshare in New York or Storably in Philadelphia. And it terrifies me to think about what my life would have been like if I would have taken that job in New York. And, I'm sure I would have figured it out and I'd be hopefully on the level of, my career and happiness that I am today. But yeah, I can't imagine not being in Philadelphia for these past, 6 or 7 years. And because of Curate and Peopledelphia, I've been able to really have this amazing network and this amazing platform where I'm able to get to anybody, in the city, within a few emails or a few connections. And that's really powerful. And I'm just starting to realize that, and I'm just starting to access that. So there are a lot of projects I'm working on and a lot of things that I want to work on that now that I've done that work and I've built those relationships and I've built that platform, that I have this platform to do some really cool things over the next couple of years.
What would you say is the most surprising thing about being an influencer?
How much I hate being called an influencer.
Yeah? That's great. Why?
The term is, it's such a, and I mean, I have to use it on a daily basis. It's become such a buzzword. And I also think that people have this aspiration to become an influencer, which to me is just the wrong mindset, because if you're trying to become an influencer, that means you're not authentic about what you're trying to actually share and the stories that you're trying to tell. I think the best influencers are people who just happen to be an influencer because they've been telling really great stories and building really awesome communities. And then because of that, they just now have this platform. So I think, the most surprising thing is how much I hate being called an influencer. But in addition to that, I think one of the most surprising things is how that's now impacting my new venture and, my lead generation. So while it was always in the back of my head that by building these platforms, it'll lead to more business opportunities, Peopledelphia and even my personal Instagram account have really been the main driver of lead generation for all of my new opportunities. Because now that I have this audience on Peopledelphia, this audience on my personal account, every time I push out content, that's a constant reminder to that community that I'm really good at sharing stories and really good at creating cool, unique content. So it's been really interesting to see that that's my main kind of funnel for lead generation at the moment.
So I'd like to ask you a couple questions that I ask all my guests just to get different perspectives, a variety of perspectives. What would you say is a common misconception about you?
I think there are two things probably. The first thing is that I'm a really social person, right? So because I'm really good at being outgoing on the internet and telling these stories, I think that people probably assume that I'm an extrovert because I am very extroverted online, and I can be very extroverted offline, and I'm very good at it, but it's very exhausting for me. So I think that's probably one misconception. And then another, and I've started to try and be more authentic on Instagram and tell stories and show more of the lowlights. I think another misconception is just, wow, this guy just gets paid to travel all the time and his life is so perfect. And in reality, it's my fault that perception of me is out there, because those are the stories that I'm telling. That's what I'm pushing out there, and that's what people are seeing. But there's a lot of hard work and a lot of late nights and a lot of tough days that go into, the work that I do and this company that I'm trying to build.
Well, I mean, a lot of people, I think nowadays, agree with the fact that what you see on social media is generally just the highlights, and it kind of can be discouraging to look at everyone's highlight reel when you don't see their lowlights, as you say. So
yeah, and I think we're now at a point where people are aware of that. Like, people all agree that, okay, these are all highlights, but we're not yet at the point where people, when they're seeing that highlight, that's top of mind. So even though we're aware that these are mainly highlights, when you're consuming this content every day for hours, when all adds up at the end of the day, how long you've been looking at Instagram, it still isn't top of mind that these are just highlights. So one thing that I've been trying to do more is really show the process and talk about some failures, talk about deals that I've lost, talk about a tough day that I'm having, because it's important for people to know that because I'm really good at taking photos and really good at telling a story, that doesn't mean that my life is these, the highlights, just the highlights that I'm putting out there.
That'd be a weird life anyway, to just have highlights. Then it'd be
right.
wouldn't be highlights, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
If you could send a message to yourself in the past, at any point in time, whether at Cure Late, before Cure Late, even when you're picking between 500 majors, would you? And if so, what would you say?
I don't know if I would want to go back in time and tell myself to do a certain thing.
Let's put it this way, because you know what? I get that a lot actually with this question. And I agree, if I knew what I know now then, I probably would have made another decision and I wouldn't have the great things that I have now. So I wouldn't. But is there something that you would tell maybe somebody who's sort of following in the same path? Butterfly effect aside, right?
Yeah, butterfly effect aside. I think patience is really important in understanding the bigger picture. Even I struggle with that now, which is funny, because I'm telling myself that right now in this moment, and 2 days from now I'll be in a situation where I need to remind myself of patience. But it's easy to forget about the bigger picture. Even in going back to that moment with Storably and Skillshare and trying to make that decision, if I would have had the money, I would have went with Skillshare. But looking back, it shouldn't have been about the money. It should have been about patience and really understand the bigger picture. With Storably, you'll be able to be at the ground floor of something, be part of the founding team, and go through way more intense trials and tribulations. So patience would have been a key factor in that decision if money wasn't the main deciding factor. So I think patience is a big issue. And then also, I just really I have ADD and just really struggle with starting. Right? It could be anything as simple as sending that email, or getting whatever's in my head out in a document, but just starting. And I still need to tell myself this on a daily basis. Sometimes it takes longer for me to get something started than it does to actually execute on the project. If I didn't have a girlfriend who was very specific about how our apartment should look and be styled, I would have a Nike poster on the ceiling, right? So when I wake up in the morning, I just see that symbol, which means a lot to me from going, doing basketball and things in high school, but just do it. Just get started, because that's something that still holds me back. So that's something that I would tell myself then, and something I still need to tell myself on a daily basis.
Have you read Phil Knight's memoir?
I have not.
I just crushed that on a Euro trip. I was there for 11 days, read the whole thing, and still experienced Europe, but highly recommend that. Some incredible stories, some great perspective. It came out recently, I think.
And it's amazing how there was a period of time, probably 2 months, where I was reading the Steve Jobs autobiography, and I can vividly remember my level of productivity, my level of just excitement about what I was doing. So it's crazy how reading a book can totally change your context and your world.
And sometimes it doesn't even totally change it. Sometimes it just gives you a little tweak in your perspective or the way you're approaching things that just opens the floodgates.
Yeah. And sometimes it's all you need. And something as simple as just opening up that document or sending that email.
I'd love to hear, if you read through that, I'd love to hear how his stories of how Nike got started and grew would be similar to your experiences with the Curate.
We'll do a part 2.
Yeah, part 2. So from your perspective of, social media and as an influencer, what do you think is the most encouraging thing about Philadelphia?
I think the one thing that's really encouraging is just the millennial growth of the city. So I think in the past 4 or 5 years, Philadelphia has been the fastest growing millennial demographic. And to me, that means that brands are going to want to reach that millennial demographic. So I think in New York and San Francisco and Chicago, these higher sort of tiered cities in terms of like brand marketing spend, there's a lot of noise. And so I think Philadelphia is sort of untapped, and there's an interesting opportunity to reach millennials because not a lot of brands are spending the money that they should yet to reach that audience. And I've seen that with Peopledelphia. I think over the past 2 years, I've done campaigns with Lyft, Anheuser-Busch, and this new real estate company called Compass. And it's, I can sense that that's why they're investing in these campaigns with Peopledelphia and with content through Lowry, because the millennial demographic is exploding here in Philly, and they see it as an untapped market, and they're going to be a little bit early.
If you could send a message to every Philadelphian, like whether a text message or an email or just a billboard, whatever, a message that every Philadelphian would see and can take a moment to ponder, what would you say?
Do something uncomfortable today. I think about all the different experiences that I've had in my life, and every great experience has come from some type of discomfort. And that could be doing something that scares you, or something as simple as not looking at your phone while you're in an elevator with somebody else and force yourself to say hello and ask that person how they're doing. I've had this idea for an app where it's very simple. Every day it just texts you or, gives you a pop-up notification that gives you a task that will put you outside of your comfort zone. Something as simple as, when you're at Starbucks today, ask for a 50% discount.
Yeah.
Just do it.
See what happens.
Just see what happens.
Yeah.
Chances are they're going to say no.
Yeah.
But when you start to constantly, put yourself, step out of this boundary of just when you put yourself in these feelings or these situations where you feel uncomfortable, you start to learn more about yourself and you start to open up your eyes a little bit. So yeah, I don't know if that's too general of a statement to say to everybody.
Not at all. I mean, that example actually, so when I hear that, I think of, stuff like taking risks and stuff like, more, I put it more businessy, type thing, take a risk like that. But what you're saying there is a really interesting way to think about it. I think we put ourselves in social boxes, like, we apply these boundaries, as you said, of social behavior that may not be necessary, right? So what would happen if you did ask for 50% off? Or what would happen if you did talk to the person in the elevator or the subway platform? They may not think you're weird for that. I think a lot of people assume that, right? And you could build a great relationship or get half off your latte. So I love that.
I think it goes to this meaning that we put into so many things throughout a daily basis that we're not even aware of. So for instance, when you wake up on Monday morning, already from the time of day that it is, the gender that you are, the month, the temperature, the fact that it's a Monday, you've already made a bunch of assumptions and you've already determined what your day is going to be like.
Wow.
Because of all of these made up constructs, right? Oh, it's a Monday. Shit, it's Monday.
It's gonna suck.
Right, but Monday isn't real.
Yeah.
It's not. Like if you could erase the fact that Monday is a Monday, of what society considers a Monday, you would 1000% treat Monday differently.
Wow.
And so when you can start to be aware of that and start to remove that meaning from different aspects of your life, and it's not as simple as saying, oh, Monday isn't a Monday, because guess what? Every single message that we consume from media, from our friends, from internet, from everything reminds us that Monday is Monday. So it's something you need to constantly work toward. But when you can remove that meaning of what Monday is, it totally opens up this new possibility of whatever you want that day to be.
Wow. For more on Brendan, Rory, and Peopledelphia, you can head to podphillywho.com/Lowry. That's Lowry. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter @PodPhillyWho. Special thanks to Brendan for being a guest. Music by Lee Rosevere. Podcast art by Lauren Carhart. For Philly Who, my name is Kevin Schmidlin. See you next week.